Without further ado, Dr. Susskind.
Thank you.
You're like 20 pages or 21 pages?
20 pages.
Добрый вечер. Меня зовут Yisroel Susskind. Rabbi Kanelsky has asked me to give the talk in Russian, but I don't think I'm going to do that.
Thank you.
So if you will bear with my English, at this point I will continue on in English. But Rabbi Kanelsky, Rabbi Sterling, I want to thank you for having me back here at Bris Avrohom again. You do wonderful work. I'm most familiar with the work that you do with couples. And when you do work with couples, it means you're also creating parents and grandparents of children and grandchildren. So I'm going to be talking tonight about some points in what you can do to be an even more wonderful parent and grandparent. I have basically 8 points that I want to make. I don't know if I'll cover all 8 in the time. If not, the Kanelskys will have to invite me back again. I would invite you to ask me questions. I get bored sometimes when I give the same lecture over and over again. It's very embarrassing if I fall asleep during my own talk. And to the extent that you ask questions, it means that every talk is different and individually geared to the needs of the people who are sitting here. I would hope that if you ask me a question, you try to have some sense of what issue am I dealing with, and only asking questions relevant to that issue. And hopefully, if I go through all 8 issues, there will be room for you to appropriately ask any questions that you have. Now, you are here tonight, most of you, either as a favorite of Rabbi Kanelsky, or because you have children and grandchildren who you love, and you want to do good things for them. Now, being a child, being a grandchild, a parent and a grandparent is not an easy task. I know my own childhood had its own difficulties, enough that even though I was raised Orthodox, at the age of 18, I left it all. Done. Finished. It had to do with things that were going on in my family. Thank God, at the age of 42, Chabad pulled me back. I got to reconcile with God. I got to reconcile with my parents. I got to realize how deeply I loved my father. My father, as many parents, had a very powerful influence on me. Even my fooling around with the Russian, picking up a couple of Russian words, Kak dela, очень хорошо, спасибо большое, is his influence. My father was a linguist. My father had studied over 100 languages in his life. My children will tell you that this Susskind brilliance occurs in every second generation. I have a question for you. What do you call, in Russian, someone who speaks more than 3 or more languages?
Polyglot.
Polyglot. And what I saw today was многоязычный.
Многоязычный.
Sorry?
Многоязычный.
Язычный? Язычный?
Yeah, так.
Okay. So, what do you call someone, lady, please, thank you. What do you call someone in Russian who speaks 2 languages? Dvujazychny. Okay? So, lady, what is your name?
My name?
Your name?
Mila.
Как вас зовут?
Меня зовут Мила.
Mila.
Yes.
Okay. Mila, what do you call in Russian someone who speaks only one language?
Одноязычный.
No. Amerikanska. My father, I told you, was a very impressive, very brilliant man. Recently, one of his grandchildren, a nephew of mine, told me that he was walking through Chinatown in Manhattan with my father. They were planning to buy some clothing there. And my father pointed to a sign on a store and said, "That's the clothing store." And my nephew Jeremy said to my father, "Grandpa, I didn't know you knew Chinese." And my father said, "My Chinese is..." But in fact, that's Tibetan. Now, some parent-child relationships are difficult. There's a story about a Jewish boy in a school in Russia. And the teacher says to him, "Who is your father?" He's a smart boy. He says, "Comrade Stalin." "And who is your mother?" "The Rodina, Mother Russia." "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" "An orphan." Sometimes, old joke, old joke, old joke, good joke, old joke. Good. Okay. Now, some relationships are more loving than that. Mila, when you are talking to a child and you want to speak to the child lovingly, so I might say to a child, "Süßkeit," "Bubbele,"
Бубалы, you're right.
"Bubbele," "Kayere Kind." What would you say in Russian?
I would say in English, Shane Puni.
Shenapuni.
Agita Nishume.
Agitinu Shume, mein Tzadikel. Anything in Russian? Someone told me synok means little boy. Okay? Zunele. Aber Zunele is showing Yiddish, ja?
Yes.
Nicht Russisch.
Yeah.
Okay, but Sinok is like...
Zunele. Okay. So there's another story. There's a young boy who's being sent off to school, and his mother says to him, "Nu bubbele, bubbele, mein Tire. Today you're going to school for the first time. My tzaddik, you're going to learn things. It's going to be gewaldig, mein Süßkeit. So when you come home from school, bubbele, I want you to tell me all about it." The boy goes to school, comes back. The mother says, "Nu Shenapuni, what did you learn in school?" He said, "I learned my name is Alex." Hopefully, we are able to relate to our children and our grandchildren, whether they are 7 years old or 70 years old. I remember my mother-in-law, Aleha Sholom, who, when my brother-in-law, who was 70 at the time, had some medical problems, she was worried about her little bubbele, a 70-year-old bubbele. It is very important when someone has the experience of being a Googler. Unfortunately, not everybody has that experience. And I learned another Russian word. And it's the word around which I want to build my talk tonight. It's the word daragoy. Tired. Precious. Precious. Tired in Yiddish also means precious, just like a precious metal. The single most important thing that we can do for a child as a parent is for them to experience that they are daragoy, that they are precious to us. I work sometimes with people as a therapist where they are facing challenges and they need to find the inner strength and courage to deal with that challenge. And I look for resources in their mind and in their memory. And when they are able to remember that they were very special, they are daragoy to somebody, it empowers them. Sadly, I've seen exactly the opposite. I've seen people in a marriage, staying in a marriage, where ultimately the marriage is becoming more and more toxic. And I'm saying, why are they sitting in this? And the fact is, they never experienced being precious to someone. They didn't expect it. And when it was missing in their relationships, they just assumed that's the way it was supposed to be. Unfortunately, usually at some point these people wake up and realize things are not right here. They need to change, or I need to leave. Again, in a negative sense, when we see children, well, let me put it in the positive. The Rebbe always said, if you have a choice between saying it positive or negative, say it positive. When you see a child who has a firm sense of daragoy, they're less vulnerable to abuse. They are less likely to be taken in by someone, and we have serious problems with this issue of abuse. They are less likely to be taken in by someone, and they are more likely, if someone is bothering them, they're more likely to tell someone, if they have daragoy. I want to ask you a question. It's a question that I was asked 40-something years ago. I was applying to graduate school. One of the schools that I applied to was New York University. And during the interview, the psychologist, the clinical psychologist who was interviewing me, said, "Tell me a little bit about your childhood and one of your favorite memories of childhood." By the way, I would ask you to think, when did you experience being daragoy? If you had that, do you pass that on to younger people? If you didn't have that, do you feel in your bones how important it would have been to have that? Does that motivate you to find a way to convey daragoy to your children and grandchildren? So I said I was going to ask you a question. I didn't ask it yet. So Mila, I hope you're paying attention. You want to get the answer right. Okay? So I'm at this interview at New York University, and the interviewer says, "Tell me a little bit about your childhood." And he says to me, "Tell me what was one of your most precious memories from childhood." And I told you, I had wonderful things in my childhood, but I had things I was also very unhappy about. And I thought about it. I did not get to spend a lot of time with my father. My father was born in Slovakia. His parents left him in Slovakia when he was 6 years old in 1910. They went to America. His grandparents knew that his parents were leaving. He didn't know. And for 10 years, he was not with his parents. His parents did not expect it to take that long, but the First World War broke out, and that made things very difficult. And he grew up during the First World War in Slovakia with his grandparents. It was a terrible time. Excuse me? It was under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but other people like the Russians came through the Dukla Pass, visited the town. They weren't the best tourists. So he hadn't been played with a lot as a boy, and he didn't play with me a lot. I used to have a complaint. He never took me to a baseball game. It was only when I got older when I realized nobody took him to a baseball game. Anyway, this interviewer asks me about a special moment. And I say to him, one of the things my father and I shared was an appreciation of humor. And there was a movie theater in Manhattan in those days called a Laugh Movie. And the only things they showed were funny things. We were Orthodox. I guess today you'd call it modern Orthodox. In those days, it was the only Orthodox we knew. We went to movies. My father would take me to movies, and we would laugh together for 2 hours. I hadn't thought about that in years. It comes out as I'm talking to this interviewer, and I start to cry. And I figure, that's it. They're not taking me into this school. They must figure I'm some sort of a emotionally not well put together crazy. Well, I did get in. I didn't go there, but they accepted me. I suspect that maybe part of the reason was I found out later the clinical psychologist who was interviewing me was also a Borscht Belt comedian. And he had gone through a major soul-searching struggle as to whether to become lifelong professional comedian or to continue with his studies and get his PhD. So what question do I have for you? Do you have special moments that you shared with your caregivers? Whether they were parents, grandparents, your Aunt Esther, whoever it was who took care of you as a young, an older sister. Do you have moments that are precious to you, that you can remember? And when you take a look at what you do with your children, and you're predicting into the future, can you imagine what might they remember about doing with you that would be very special to them? We have a movie in the family. When I was a little boy, I saw a movie called The Court Jester with Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye, an incredible comedian and wonderful with children. I love it. When my children were little, I showed it to my children. And my grandchildren have climbed into my bed. I have a big bed. And watched the movie with me. It's family tradition. And it's precious to them all. What did you get that you hold on to that's a precious moment? What do you create for your children? So I said I had 8 points to make tonight. I probably used up half of my time on one. I'll try to move a little more quickly through the others. I said I was going to build it around the word daragoy. I'm using daragoy as a 7-letter acronym. There are different ways to spell it. In English, I'm spelling it D-A-R-A-G-O-I. Other ways to spell it, I know. And each of the remaining 7 points reflects one letter in daragoy, and I'm going to try to go through it. One has to do with affection. Do you show affection to your children that is not tied to what they do? They are loved. Period. But what if they do something they shouldn't do? What if they need to be reprimanded, punished in some way? There are all the kinds of things you can take away. You can take away ice cream. You can take away toys. For college students, you can take away their car. But you don't take away your love. And you don't take away your smile. You do not allow yourself to be swallowed up by anger. And of all the emotions that Torah warns about the most, anger is the most serious. That's a whole other Dvar Torah. Affection is important, but it's not enough. An 18-year-old Russian Jewish boy from Leningrad is making aliyah to Israel. He gets off the plane in Lod, in Israel, and he is not carrying a violin. What do you call such a boy?
Passenger.
Pianist. Because he is kulturny, he is sophisticated. We expect him to be multi-talented. That was the expectation of our children in Russia. And the parents knew and the children knew that unless you excelled, you did not have much of a future. You were going to have to be in the top 10% of whatever it is you were trying to do, because the other 90% of the positions for certain were going to be given to real Russians. Do you convey to your children, first of all, an appreciation for their talents, so they feel motivated to advance and sharpen those talents? If I talked to one of your children and said, what is your Abba, Ima, your Tati, what are they proud of you for? What are they impressed with? I've had children say to me, I know they love me. I had teenagers say to me, I know they love me, but they don't respect me. If I said, for what do your parents respect you? Are they impressed? Would your children have an answer? When you were children, but they were impressed by you. Rabbi Tversky, Rabbi Dr. Abraham Shia Tversky, tells a wonderful story about his boyhood. He is from the Tverskys. This is a rabbinic dynasty of many generations. He was living in his grandfather's house, and the rule of the house was on Shabbos, we don't play chess. It's not holy enough. They had a visiting rabbi who said to the young Tversky, I understand you're good at chess. Would you like to play a game? And the young Tversky said to himself, well, I have to be a good host to our visitors. And he played. Motzi Shabbos, he is told his grandfather wants to see him in the grandfather's study. This cannot be good. Walks up to the doorway of the study. He is standing there, waiting for his grandfather to give him permission to come in. Grandfather calls him in. He says, tell me, did you play chess with our guest? Yes. I find it very hard to imagine the regal Rabbi Tversky being as humble as that, but he was a little boy. You know, we don't play chess in this house on Shabbos. Yes? Yes? You're dismissed. So the young Tversky starts to walk out to the door, and his grandfather says, did you beat him? And Tversky says, twice. With the setting of the rules, with the setting of the expectations, there's a pride. A pride that's conveyed to the child in terms of their accomplishments. And whether their accomplishments are in school, whether they're a wonderful reader, whether they have a knack for mathematics or computers, or they've got it in their hands and they're always building things, whether they love music, they sing, they play, they draw. One of my grandchildren, my grandson Mendel, this year has developed a lust for cooking. And he's a wonderful cook. And he learned to cook a very sophisticated carrot cake. And for our Hanukkah party, I made sure to ask Mendel if he would bake his carrot cake for the party. Affection, achievement. Two of the A's in dialogue. R, recreation, play. It's important for people to feel they have permission to play and that play is a healthy thing for them. I heard one very senior rabbi crying as he was talking about his childhood. He was a prodigy, an Ilud. And he said he'd walked by a yeshiva yard where kids were playing ball. And he said, would it have been so terrible if they had let me play ball when I was a boy? It's important for people to respect the value of play and to understand I'm not talking about watching television. I'm not talking about something passive. I'm talking about something where a person is active and immersed in something. Whether they're like my grandson Nati, who swallows books the way that you are swallowing chips. Whether it's someone who has a love of music, a love of athletics, where there's a passion. I played for you before some klezmer music. One of the musicians was Yitzhak Perlman. My son Ari, when he was 3 years old, came into the room and he heard Yitzhak Perlman playing. And he was only 3 years old. My wife got him violin lessons, this Suzuki method of violin for very young children. Yes, did you have a comment or question?
What if my grandson see Yisroel Susskind play?
I'm sorry?
In the house? I mean,
It was in my house.
oh, in the house.
And it's like he was on drugs. Daragoy has an O in English. Open. You want to protect children. They need to feel safe being open with their parents. I try to encourage parents to tell their children and teachers in school to tell their children, if anybody asks you to get involved in doing something that you feel you can't tell your parents, don't do it. Because they are putting you in a position where they will be able to manipulate you and take advantage of you. 1, don't do it. 2, if you did it and they said to you, you can't tell anybody. In fact, if you don't do what I want you to do, I'm going to tell on you. You go and you tell your parents. Whatever it is, you will always be loved. That person is telling you you'll be thrown out of the community, you'll be thrown out of school, whatever it is. You need to know you are safe being open with us, and never listen to someone who is trying to get you to do something where the condition is you can't tell your parents. It is very protective of children. We have an expression in Hebrew, v'hamevin yavin. Okay? Those who get what I'm talking about, got it. I is for inspire. We live in very difficult times. Our children face very difficult times, both from the left and from the right. We live in a period of time of great cynicism, pessimism, selfishness. We have young people, I teach at a college, have young people who are not planning to marry, not planning to have children. This is not just a problem at my college. This is a problem throughout the Western world. Marriage rates and birth rates are falling with disastrous consequences for countries. Part of the reason the Europeans have brought in, not all of the reason, as many foreigners into their country is they don't have enough young people to run their economy. The worst place is Japan. In Japan, 40% of their population are over the age of 65. There's a diaper manufacturer in Japan who said, I sell more diapers for adults than I do for babies. And you can laugh. There are states in the United States that are closing schools, and the government there is thrilled because their tax rates are going down, because their educational budget is lower, and they're not saying what happens 20, 30 years from now when we did not raise a cohort of children to take over the economy. I saw an article by a Russian Jewish immigrant to the United States who was talking about the cynicism and despair that was in the Soviet Union before it collapsed. There were large numbers of people for a long time who still believed in the communist dream. We would work hard, we would suffer, but the good times would come. People stopped believing. So this Russian writes in his article, what is the difference between a Russian pessimist and a Russian optimist? A Russian pessimist says, I believe it's going to be bad. A Russian optimist says, I know going to be bad. You ask a Russian, which is going to be better, A or B? He says, Ubi хуже. They're both worst. We are seeing in the culture of the country distrust, a belief that if you act loyally or expect loyalty, you're a fool. The state of Israel is stronger now, economically and militarily, than it ever has been in its history. But the major factor, the major human factor, we know the big factor, but the major human factor is the belief of Israeli youth in the dream. Some of them have lost that. Thank God there are enough of them who have it, but the country is still strong. The country's survival, separate from whatever plans the Kadosh Baruch Hu has, depends on that belief. The secular parts of the country do not teach optimism, do not teach courage, character, the importance of finding something meaningful and dedicating yourself to that. There was a time in the United States when that was done. Up until about 1950, those values were taught. They're not being taught in secular circles. You need to see, where do you inspire your children with positive values and a willingness to dedicate themselves for things to be better for them and for the country. Now, we also have a problem on the right. There are many incredible things in Judaism, but we're having educational problems in our Jewish schools. And we're having educational problems in our Jewish schools because in many places, Judaism is being taught as a burden and a responsibility. Alan Dershowitz, American lawyer, professor of law, philosopher, wrote a book called The Vanishing American Jew. He was interviewing a Jewish woman college student and asked her, what's her image of Judaism? She said, Judaism is an old man saying no. That's not something that binds our children to Jewish values. And the question is, do you take great pleasure out of the beauty of Judaism, of Jewish culture, of the privilege of being a Jew? Do they see that in you? Are you able to show them what a precious gift that is? The cleverness in it, the kindness in it, the wholesomeness in it, the playfulness in it. You are the place where they are most likely to get that or not get that. The word daragoy begins with a D. Divine, holy. I started out by talking about how do you convince your child that they are very important. Affection, achievement. But at this end, we're talking about how do you teach your child that they're not important at all. When I say that they're not important at all, that there are things out there that are much bigger than they are. And that what life is about is finding your meaning in life and finding the things in life that are worth dedicating yourself to. If you study what psychologists write about happiness, they say people who find something outside of themselves that they are dedicated to are happy people and strong people. I lived in Pittsburgh. I met a Chabad rabbi named Itcher. Oh God. Name flew out of my head. Doesn't make a difference. It'll come back. His grandfather had been a teacher of little children in Russia during Stalin's time. Now there were generals of tank units who were afraid to disobey Stalin. And this little Jewish Melamed was breaking the law by teaching Hebrew and Torah to little children. Rabbi Itkin, Fitchem Itkin. His grandfather was caught and killed. And Fitchem Itkin was very proud of his grandfather, because his grandfather believed in something that was bigger than him. Now, sometimes the bigger than me is my wife, my immediate family, my community, my relationship with God. But we need that divine element in our life. And the problem is that both on the right and on the left, it's often absent. Certainly in secular circles, that's not what you hear. And I grew up Orthodox in a wonderful setting with wonderful teachers, and I loved many things about being Jewish, and you wouldn't know it to look at me today, but I was a paid Israeli folk dance performer. Dibarti Ivrit Mishutefet, Ivrit B'Ivrit. I was a Zionist. I loved the history of the Jewish people, but I didn't know how to spell God. Okay? I know Gor nu Gor nicht. There are things you can do to expose your children to people who have that kind of a connection and help make that kind of a connection. But you need to take a look. That kind of a connection is not happening automatically, not from the secular context, not from their religious context. Last of the letters of Galagoy. I don't know if you kept track. I have been. Generational. Do you share your family history with your children? Do you help them feel connected to the past? To the Jewish people? To the wonders of the Jewish people? In a very personal way, by sharing your family history. I want to tell you a story about a man that at least one person in here knows, probably more than one. A wonderful, wonderful man, Dr. Alex Polterek. Yes, Rabbi Nelson. Alex lives in Muncie. We have a Mechutin here. He's a wonderful man. He was a physicist in Russia. He chose to follow his heart and his soul. He became a refusenik, giving up a privileged position to put himself under the gun. He came to America, worked as a physicist, decided to challenge some corporations who were stealing patents from physicists. Took them to court on his own and won. Started a firm of lawyers on intellectual property rights. He's a wonderful guy. He told me a story about his father. When the war broke out, the Second World War broke out, and a year or two later, the Germans invaded Russia. His father was a young soldier, 17, 18 years old, I think, in Stalingrad. Defending Stalingrad, both his legs were blown off. He normally would have been expected to die, but it was too cold to die. He didn't bleed out. Given the cold, his heart rate dropped, and even though he spent a day or two out there in the snow, they brought him into a hospital, he survived. So he is a veteran cripple, and as hard as it is for our veterans today, we have made incredible strides in prosthetics and physical therapy. Okay? I know a man who's missing a leg, and when he dances at a wedding, you couldn't tell he's missing a leg. It wasn't like that. And Alex tells me that most of the wounded veterans, they were treated with respect by the government, and they got extra rations for vodka to comfort them. And most of them sat in their wheelchairs and drank vodka until they died from the vodka. And his father decided he was going to learn how to walk. I don't know what kind of makeshift devices he got. Okay? I'm sure they're not the beautiful things with foam and highly polished steel and rubber cups at the bottom that you see nowadays. He went to law school. He became a lawyer, and I take it that he was brilliant enough. See, in Alex's family, it doesn't skip a generation. That he became a senior judge in the Soviet Union. And Alex tells the story with a great deal of pride. Do you share the stories of your family with your children? Do you root them and give them heroes? Today, for certain, in the secular culture, there are no heroes. Anyone who looks like he was a hero, there's a revisionist book showing that he was a bum. Our children need heroes. You can be the heroes. Your example. And the things that you pass on to them, starting with Donna Goy. I want to tell you one story, and with that I'm going to finish my presentation. And it pulls together a number of things. Some things about my father, some things about humor, some things about being proud of being a Jew. My father was raised in a town in Slovakia called Stropkov. So there's a story. There is a train that is going from Vienna, or maybe from Pressburg, the capital of Slovakia, to Budapest. The train is going to go to Stropkov, and at the station there you change trains because, countries would make the size of the tracks of the railroad cars different so that another country's railroad couldn't just come barreling in with soldiers. So this, say, 20-year-old Jewish bacher is sitting in a railroad car. He's got a book in front of him. And opposite him is a clearly very wise, very learned rabbi with a long beard. And he says, Rabbi, tell me, can you tell me the time? And the rabbi says, no. That was no. I guess the rabbi is very busy studying his Talmud. He doesn't want to be bothered. 10 minutes go by. The young man says, Rabbi, I hate to bother you. I know you're learning, but could you tell me the time? He says, no. Another 10 minutes go by. The young man is really getting very upset. Look, Rabbi, I don't know why you don't want to tell me the time. Could you at least tell me why you don't want to tell me the time? I mean, the train is running late. I have to catch the last train to Budapest in Strumkiv. There's a lot hanging on this. The rabbi looks at him and says, look, young man, you think I don't know how this starts? I'll tell you the time. You'll say, thank you very much. My name is Moshe Weinberg. What's your name? And you're going to say, my name is Rabbi Kanelsky. And the young man, you're going to say, oh, Kanelsky. We have cousins in Munkach named Kanelsky. Do you know the Munkach Kanelskys? Do I know the Munkach Kanelskys? The Munkach Kanelskys are cousins of mine. So now, young man, we have established that you are a cousin. Now, am I going to let a cousin of mine sit in a cold railroad station all night? There is no chance that you're going to catch that train. So no, I'm going to take you home with me. We come into the house. My daughter, Reisel, is going to come running. Tati, Tati, Tati. My beautiful daughter, Reisel. What are you laughing? She is beautiful. What are you talking? You're going to see my daughter. We don't get a lot of young men coming through our village. So, in the morning, you're going to come over to me and say, Cousin Kanelsky, I have a mazel tov. I have good news. Reisel and I have decided we're going to get married. Now look, young man, do you think I want a son-in-law who can't even afford a watch? You can't tell that joke about an Irishman. You can't tell it about an Italian, about an American Indian. It is quintessentially Jewish. And it points out at least two of the Gavaldic characteristics of Jews. One is that humor is wired into us. And the other is we have a very particular way of thinking. I hope you will share that specialness with the children, that they will feel they are Daragoy, their family is Daragoy, and that Jewish culture, values, and religion are Daragoy. Rabbi Kanelsky, do you want me to take questions, or are we done for the night?
Yeah, please.
If there are questions, I will try to answer. Yes, sir.
I have a 6-year-old girl, and she's just left. Now, it's very important to point out how proud we are, right?
Correct.
Now, she started writing, and obviously her spelling is not correct.
Correct.
So, what is more important at this point? To compliment how the fact that she's writing herself, and then later on she'll find out that I didn't even correct her or misled her that it's beautiful, or to compliment and correct.
So the fact is, you do both, and you do them honestly and in a measured way. So to say, if it's true, we're really thrilled that you're learning how to write and learning how to spell. It's wonderful. Not all girls your age know how to do that. Okay? It makes mommy and tati very happy and very proud. You must be a very smart little girl. Now, I want to tell you, you're just beginning to know how to do this. So you know how when you learned how to do something else, parts of it were right and parts of it were wrong. If it was an older child who had learned how to ride a bicycle, I might say, you remember, you learned how to ride a bicycle, you fell down a lot of times. And then you were so good at it, we bought you a racing bike. Whatever muscle I have. You are so good at it that we are going to spend time teaching you how to be great at it. Because you could be someone who at your age could start to learn to read and write that way, could be great at it. Now, I want you to pick one word that you're not sure if it's spelled right. I want to teach it to you. In fact, we're going to pick 5 words, and if by tomorrow you can write those 5 words, you get a reward. We're going out for ice cream. So I wouldn't say it unless I meant it. That it's wonderful that she, on her own, without being forced, took this on. And I want to show you how to do it better. But I'm not going to show you 100 words that you misspelled. You crush it. I'll show you 1, or 3, or 5. And you know what? We're going to make a board in the room of all the new words that you've learned how to spell. Every 5 words is a trip to the candy store. 100 words, we're going to need to think about something big. So I am not giving false praise, and I'm saying to the child, the fact that what you are doing is imperfect and has mistakes, I'm convinced that doesn't make a difference. Lots of people in lots of places make mistakes. The important thing is look what you did.
So it's important to point out the corrections?
Absolutely.
And why?
Why? First of all, you want her to grow.
She will. She will
2,
learn.
she needs to learn that it's okay to make mistakes. I know some children who, if they're trying to learn something and it starts to get hard and they're making mistakes, they stop. They can't tolerate being wrong. She needs to learn to handle that. You are in a position to help her. There's no reason why you shouldn't. And you're right. If everything is always perfect, the child will grow to distrust you. Because at some point, they're going to understand it's not perfect. Ah, so you were ashamed to tell me that it was perfect. You were ashamed of me. Because not being perfect is really terrible. That's why you did it for me, Doctor, yes? And I'm saying it's not a big deal. The only people who don't make mistakes in life are cowards. Because they keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over. I'm very proud of you that you reached, that you pushed for the next level. Kol hakavod. But you have to be moderate in the amount of criticism. When I get a paper from a student, I look through it and I say, I've got to be able to, there must be 4 or 5 good things in this paper. Somebody said to a student, so they wrote on the paper, creative and original F. Student came back. What is this? Creative and original F? He says, the part that was creative wasn't original, and the part that was original wasn't creative. I make it a point. It seems to me that what you were trying to say is, and I think that point and that point and that point are very well done. It was worth reading the paper. Now, here are 4 things you need to do to fix this. The paragraphs are all too long. Do not give me a sheet of paper where there's 1 paragraph on a sheet. I expect At least 2.5, preferably 3 paragraphs on a sheet. Okay? You didn't put in references for some of the statements you made. I want references. So bring it back to me next week. You're taught in management. You do the same thing when you call an employee in for their annual evaluation. If you want to keep that employee, the first thing you do is to say, we noticed that you did this, 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 and this. We really like it, and this improved over last year. Still, we have 4 serious problems here. They need to be taken care of by next year. I don't want to see these 4. But you don't start out with the 4 problems. And sometimes you only give them 2. In marriage, people are in my office, they're complaining about something, and my rule is you can make one complaint at a time. If you put 5 complaints on the plate, your husband stopped listening to you 2 complaints ago. Sir.
For those who it may not come as naturally, what are some good examples to
You know that? That are good.
I didn't say anything. Very simple. I look for something positive about the person to say. And I practice at different places. Some places it's easier than others. Rabbi Kanelsky gives a talk, and after the talk, how many people go over to him and say, you know, the point you made about such and such and such and such really spoke to my heart. You know, I send out writings. I used to do it twice a month. I've been pressed with things and not been getting them out as often. There's a sign-up sheet in the back if you want to get my writings. My writings go out to about 1,000 people. Any week, about 300 people open what gets sent. My mail distribution people tell me that's a good percentage. Sometimes I get no reaction at all. Sometimes I get 3 people who say, Dr. Susskind, I don't know how you knew what was going on with me, but what you wrote came to me at a very important time. I want to thank you. And on a really good one, maybe I get 10 to 15 responses. And I think that there are more than 10 or 15 people who like it. But they figured, who am I to Susskind? What is he going to care whether I say anything? And they keep their gift to themselves. And I've seen a rabbi give a wonderful talk in front of a congregation. And there are numbers of people who found it helpful, valuable, interesting, impressive, eye-opening. They don't say it. Do you walk over to people in shul and just say, Good Shabbos, how are you doing? And even if you're going to get a Baruch Hashem, okay? Non-committal answer. You bothered to go over to this guy. Maybe it's a guy who's a pest and most people ignore him. And you know he needs that little bit of support. You look for the good and you make it a point to react or to comment. And you're surrounded by so much good. You have a little girl who on her own decided she wants to learn how to read. It's beautiful. You don't take stuff for granted. There's beautiful stuff around you all the time. And you ask yourself, whose heart did I touch today? Do I know somebody where a word from me would make a difference? I work at work, I'm a more senior person at work. There's some junior people working. I see the work the guy is doing. I walk out of my supervisor's booth. I go down to his cubicle, and I say, I want you to know, I saw that report you handed in last week. It was really well done. You know somebody's sick. I've had situations where there was someone who hadn't been insured for a month. I finally called him. I should have called him the first week. Nobody called him. He was feeling terrible. He was thrilled that I called. People are hungry. Where did you touch somebody's heart this week? Most important, your wife. Is there something that you know that would please your wife that she hasn't asked you for? And you go out and you do it. It's not your job. It's not your obligation. It's not a holiday where you have to buy her a gift. It's not her birthday. You're just conveying, I've been thinking about the fact that you're really important to me. You don't have to put into words. You just go out and do it. I'm not allowed to talk about my wife, so this is not about my wife. I want you to understand that. But there was this man and his wife who were window shopping in West Nyack, not far from Muncie. And they stopped by a jewelry shop there run by two Israeli women. And the wife was admiring a piece of copper jewelry. Not terribly expensive, $300, not gold. But they were just window shopping because they had made an agreement. This was just for fun. They had a goal that they were saving for. They weren't going to. They were with another couple, friends of theirs. So the man detached himself from the group and said, you guys go on ahead, I'll join you in a minute. They went off. He came back into the store. He bought the necklace, slipped it in his pocket, went and joined the friends, didn't say a word. That night, 8 o'clock, he's got a meeting. His wife is downstairs. He goes upstairs, puts the box on her pillow. He's getting ready to leave the house. He says, honey, I'm going off to give a talk. My cell phone will be off, so you won't be able to reach me, unless it's some sort of emergency. I'll talk to you in the morning. So his wife comes upstairs, and there's the pillow, and there's the box, and there's the copper necklace, and she can't even thank him. She can't reach him. You say to yourself, if I wanted to touch somebody's heart and make them feel cared about, what would I do? Because as a person I want to be. I'm very connected. I like to believe I'm very connected to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is a brilliant intellect, prolific writer, incredible administrator of a worldwide organization with thousands of employees. And I don't care. What gets to me about the Rebbe and what brought me back to Yiddishkeit, I got the clear message that the Rebbe's life is about love. About caring about. And I've run into many other people whose connection to the Rebbe is on the same basis. So to say, wouldn't it be magnificent if I became an incredible loving person? If when people looked at me, that's the way they felt about me? Now, I don't assume I'm ever going to get near to the level of the Rebbe. but I can use him as an inspiration to say, stay awake, Susskind, stay awake. Think about what your life wants, what you want your life to be about. Don't just get caught up in all the details, because there are a lot of details. I feel the weight of a lot of details. But I don't want my life to be about taking out the garbage. And you can make yourself that kind of person. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure talking to you tonight. Yes?
Just a quick question. We have a daughter who's turning 20, and as she is, in the throes of young adulthood, she feels that it's babyish to be called terms of endearment from my husband. Mama, absolutely not allowed. Shafallah, horrific. She texted him before she came back from Israel. She just returned from Shana that it's degrading and it's insulting, and how many times does she have to say that she just wants to be called by her name. And he catches himself for fear of letting one syllable of the word.
May I know your family name?
Lochak.
Lochak.
Mm-hmm. Not too many others.
Okay.
Don't have cousins by the name. Right. And she's loved.
I suggest that for the next year you refer to her as Miss Lochak. That's only partly a joke. What I mean is this. Children hit a certain age, somewhere between 14 and 22, when they need to stop being your children for their own health. Imagine you said to an 8-year-old child, Mommy and I have decided that you can have whatever you want. What we're doing is we're setting you up in your own apartment in a building. There's security in the building, so you don't need to worry if anything happens. You have a credit card. You can take it any way to buy whatever you need. And you want to buy candy, buy candy. You want to buy healthy food, it's all up to you. You are free. Here's the credit card. Here's the key to your apartment. And the 8-year-old's going to cry. I need my mommy and daddy. At a certain age, a child needs to learn, I need them. I was an idiot for ever thinking I needed them. Mark Twain tells a story that when he was 8 years old, he thought his father was God. When he turned 16, he couldn't believe how stupid he'd been to think that his father knew anything. And when he turned 24, he didn't believe how much his father had learned at 18. There's a rocket. It needs to leave Earth orbit to go into space. It has to do it with an explosion. It has to break away from the gravitational pull of Earth. We don't want our children to be babies all their lives. They have to learn to be independent so that they can then come back and be interdependent. And it's painful. It's been there, done that. It's painful. You have to trust that if you put love into them, they're coming back. You need to give them a little bit of space and not be frightened by the space. They need the distance. There's a principle in Torah learning called klal, uprat, uklal. Probably klal, uprat, uklal. Say it every morning in the davening. Klal General, allgemein, everything is together. The child doesn't experience himself as a separate entity from the parents. Prat means detail. The child becomes a separate individual. But we're promised cloud. The child comes back. They grow up. They're buying their first house, and they're saying, Tati, tell me about buying a house. How do you buy a house? Mommy, the baby has all these red spots on it. Do I need to take him to the emergency room? You need to let it go. To a certain extent, it's like that on a micro level in marriage. You're not always together and lovey-dovey and agreeing about everything. And some people can't stand that. There are times you need to give your partner some space. Now, if you're afraid you're going to be abandoned, then you can't do that. But they come back. So this is an age where they need distance. They don't want to be your baby. If they stay your baby, at age 40, they'll be living in the same bedroom they grew up in. And we have lots of young people today in that position. I don't think you want that. It hurts. I have been there. But you have to have faith. They're going to come back. Good night. It was very nice being with you.